Welcome everyone for joining us today. So we are going to do kind of a introduction slide presentation that Kat will kick off, and then we'll open it up for questions. I see that there's new faces and also people who had applied in the last round, so thank you all for joining us today. And so my name is Mary Manda, and I am the manager of grants and community engagement with ArtsBuild, and we are joined with Kat Wright, who is the director of public art with the city of Chattanooga. So thank you all for joining us today. This will be recorded and will be posted on ArtsBuild's YouTube page. And we'll also send a follow-up email with any, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to I or Kat directly. I will pop my email address in the chat box. So Kat, if you want to kick it off, we're going to ask everyone to please mute yourselves just for this first part.
All right, thank you, Miriam. Hi, everyone. Happy Friday to you. This is a very casual, informative session. So your questions in the chat, Miriam will definitely help me sort of moderate as we go through. But we are very excited to have all of you join us this afternoon. And I see several returning applicants from round one. A little background for the Artist Work Grant Program. This is a very innovative program in terms of being able to be nimble at the government level, which is, for those of you that interface a lot with governments, that's not exactly government's cup of tea. It's very bureaucratic. We can't necessarily be as responsive as much as we would want because of a little thing called bureaucracy. So I will say that what was interesting about this is, and by we I mean ArtsBuild and Public Art Chattanooga, which is the city's division of public art, started really looking at the loss of wages for just the artistic community, and then not only the artistic community but the artistic community at large, fabricators, designers, just the whole sort of ecosystem of those that constitute the artistic community. And we know that whether that be musicians, whether that be entertainers, that COVID-19 and the lack of performances and social distancing and all the restraints with the COVID-19 pandemic has definitely taken its toll on everyone economically. And so we started, ArtsBuild and Public Art Chattanooga started really looking to see how can we help. And at the government level, typically public art, we issue RFPs and we have responses to public art projects, and it's almost very formulaic without a lot of room for innovation in terms of the initial process. The innovation comes sort of secondary when you are determining what that project may be and the design. And we were fortunate in the fact that the city can't necessarily operate as a fiscal agent to individuals, organizations. And so we were fortunate to be able to partner with Southeast Tennessee Development District as our fiscal agent. And so you'll sort of see two entities in terms of whatever particular project it is that you're hoping will be funded. You may be funded completely by ArtsBuild if it's performances and exhibitions, or you may be completely funded by Public Art and Chattanooga if it's a Public Art Chattanooga and Set D rather, if it's a public art project. But I'm going to go ahead, before I get into all of those particulars, I'm going to back up and just share my screen here. All righty. So I must give a great thanks to the city of Chattanooga, and then of course ArtsBuild, Set D, and then all of our foundations, Lyndhurst, Benwood, Footprint, for providing funding to this program. Just so you all know, the city in particular opted to fund this initiative for our current fiscal year 21. Instead of taking on more public art and capital construction projects. So this was a kind of an anomaly and I have
Pat,
great appreciation.
sorry, I'm gonna ask you to pause really quick. Just your present. I know you have it in presentation mode, but I think the way the screen share works with Zoom, you want to pull out your presentation and just share that.
Can you see just the presentation now?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Sorry about that, guys.
No worries.
No worries. So essentially, the city did opt to invest in the local artist climate rather than take on new public art projects, which last anywhere from 1 to 3 years to realize. So this particular program rather provides funding to individual artists, artist studios, and arts organizations to produce artwork for Chattanooga's public realms. The grant opportunity does extend to those not only in Chattanooga, but to those within the Thrive region. Proposed projects should enhance and animate outdoor or indoor public spaces, contribute to the local creative economy, and naturally prompt hope, healing, and connection for Chattanoogans. At least 75% of the project budget must go directly to supporting Chattanooga area and Thrive region artists, fabricators, suppliers, contractors, and vendors. And for particular notice, for those of you who aren't necessarily aware what constitutes the Thrive 2055 region, that is 16 counties in Tennessee: Bledsoe, Bradley, Hamilton, McMinn, Marion, Meigs, Polk, Ray, and Sequatchie. In Georgia, Catoosa, Dade, Murray, Walker, and Whitfield. And then in Alabama, DeKalb and Jackson. So essentially, you've got the grant opportunity being open to anyone in that particular Thrive 2055 region. But it is important to note that the projects actually have to be realized in Chattanooga. So that is a caveat there in terms of the funding. For individual artists and just individuals in general, know that you will be receiving a 1099 and will be responsible for paying taxes. I have had some questions in the past about some of how tax payments work, so on and so forth. As no one involved with this program is a licensed tax professional, I will certainly say to you as an entity to just consult with your tax advisor the implications of receiving grant funding on your overall tax liability there. What is interesting about this particular program is that you don't necessarily need to be a 501c3. You can be an individual organization, neighborhood association, an individual artist. However, we do request that groups or organizations must provide funding or some kind of in-kind donated services for the grant projects. One thing that I definitely want to note for organizations in general is we really like to see in these particular projects a partnership with a lead artist. And I think that really enriches the application from the get-go to be able to say what you plan to do and with what particular artist in mind. It doesn't necessarily have to be that you have solidified your artist per se with your proposal, but just sort of giving a good rundown of what you're hoping to achieve and with whom and so on and so forth is very, very helpful. The types of artworks may include, but are not limited to, and you can see all of those particular mediums there. They do include both temporary and permanent artworks and/or exhibitions. What I will say in terms of performances, especially in the COVID-19 climate, is your performances don't necessarily have to be live. You can certainly do either digital or virtual viewing. And when you do actual programming, you want to think about the current CDC guidelines or even local guidelines. Right now, with events and whatnot, you won't really see a lot of events happening in the city of Chattanooga with, say, more than 10 to 15 people in attendance right now, which is why we stipulate that you can definitely do a performance, whether it be theater or music or dance, just so long as perhaps you consider the fact that you may need to actually record it and produce it digitally. Grant categories. These are probably some of the two biggest changes. Before I go into the grant categories, I did want to back up and talk about the distinction between temporary and permanent artworks and or exhibitions. Temporary, as it relates to exhibitions and performances, is 6 months. So you can do, say, for instance, if you apply with ArtsBuild for the artwork projects that are up to $25,000, those particular performances would be 6 months. A permanent exhibition or performances would actually occur over a 1-year period. So 6 months for exhibitions and performances through ArtsBuild, permanent through ArtsBuild in the sense of an exhibition would be up to a year. That's a pretty important distinction. With public art, which would actually be administered by SETD in terms of the contract, but funded by the city of Chattanooga with oversight from my department, is public art is typically most known as built artworks. And you would actually be going, if you were doing a temporary exhibition, your contract would be up to 2 years. And then permanent would be for the life of the work. And we'll get more into distinctions about projects as we go forward. I think it's important to know that one of the things that we did sort of learn through the first round, which we were really, really pleased with, just the diverse proposals that were given to us to review, is I think what I would say essentially is the temporary projects, whether it be a artwork project that is through ArtsBuild or Public Art Chattanooga, it's really important to know that they have to be actualized and completed 6 months after receiving funds. Permanent projects must be completed within 1 year of receiving funds. For those of you that have been following the Artist Work Grant Program since our first round last fall, you'll notice that and I'll just back up to this slide real quick. You'll notice that our award amounts for public art projects are slightly less than they were originally publicized. Originally, we had that the projects for public arts, the funding can go up to $75,000. And what we realized very early on is we started the public art funding model with just $150,000 at our disposal. And so we quickly realized from the amazing proposals we received that were often proposed as the maximum amount available, that the committee had to evaluate how to move forward with respect to subsequent rounds. The review panel made two difficult choices as a result. One, that grants may be awarded at a lesser amount than what is proposed. So I think that's very important for you all to know that you may propose 30,000, or in ArtsBuild's case, propose 25,000, but it is very possible for your donation to get, your proposal rather, to get partially funded. And two, to maximize the amount of artists that could benefit overall from grant funding, it seemed a better approach to make the maximum grant amount award lower than $75,000 to fund more projects with more artists attached to the project. So for this second round, what we did was make pretty much the grant thresholds be very much identical, whether it be a public art project or a general artwork through ArtsBuild. Is you have $25,000 for artwork projects up to administered by ArtsBuild, and then $30,000 as the limit through projects that are funded through the city. And then I will go back to obviously the eligible expenses. 75% of the overall project budget must go directly towards supporting the Chattanooga area and Thrive region artists, nonprofits, fabricators, suppliers, contractors, and vendors. I do want to have a big note on on what it can't be used for. It can't be used for permanent positions of an organization, capital improvements, so anything like building repairs or construction, major equipment purchases. And major equipment purchases, that's hard for me to define what it is. It is simply because the mediums are so diverse in what we can award, that if you are, if you are a filmmaker and you need the creme de la creme camera and with all the bells and whistles, that's probably going to be a major equipment purchase. So just use it within your own discretion in terms of if we're really having to fund major equipment purchases, it's almost like seed money. And what we try to get away from with this particular grant program is seed money for starting new organizations or seed money for really purchasing major equipment to go forward. The other option would be obviously not using funding for school projects or fundraisers. When you think about, I want to go back up to the liability insurance and permits. This is a very important note for your budget. A lot of local artists don't necessarily have experience of installing, say, works on public or private property. With this particular grant fund, know that if you are doing any sort of visual arts exhibition that requires built artworks to be installed, anything that requires really, fabrication to be built somewhere, that you're going to need to account for liability insurance. Certainly if it's on city property, the city will not let you install without commercial liability insurance. It sounds, when I tell you the amount that you'll need, it sounds like it's expensive. It's actually a very nominal charge given your insurance agent. What you will need for general liability insurance is $1 million per occurrence and $2 million aggregate. Depending again on your insurance provider, that's usually a very nominal cost per month. And when you look at whether you're just needing it for installation, or say you have an artwork that's sited on public property and you want to make sure that if that's damaged or vandalized, that you can file a claim, you'll want to maintain insurance on that particular piece throughout the time that it is sited on public or even private property. It depends on sort of the agreement you have with that individual, the private property owner. But as it relates to public property, you'll want to factor in liability insurance into your overall budget. Let me back up. Performance and exhibition grant payment terms. So the Arts Build grants will be paid generally in 2 installments. You'll have 75% upfront at contract signing, and then 25% upon Arts Build receiving a final evaluation report, financial report, and/or program project documentation within 30 days. So every particular proposal project has different nuances, where perhaps program documentation or project documentation could be different. In the case of, say, a completed artwork, it would be providing photos of that completed artwork. With public art, usually because these particular projects require a more extended time to realize, again, you have for permanent public artworks a year to realize the public art. And then when it's a temporary exhibition, which is again 2 years, up to 2 years, you would have 6 months to realize the work. But because of sort of the elongated term or the elongated timeline associated with public art projects, you actually have 3 installments for grant payments. You have 40% upfront at contract signing. You have 50% upon project status report. That's typically the 6-month mark if you are doing the entire year for a project timeline. Again, not everyone necessarily we'll have a timeline for implementation that'll be a full year, but as a general note, I say typically the 6-month mark. Again, that'll be very individualized in your contract. And then 10% upon an evaluation report and our program project photo documentation within 30 days after the completion of the program projects. What I will say in realizing from the first round that most of the public art grants are going to be going forward at a much, I would say a much, where we'd said that it was possible to have up to 75,000. We realized through the first round that, again, that was prohibitive to allow a lot of people to benefit from this program. And then also just that what project could you do of that scale and scope over a year period and get it done? The committee really again reevaluated some of those considerations, and so it is possible for you to receive a public art grant where you can receive a grant under 10K. And if you do receive a grant under 10K, that particular grant will actually align more with the 75%, 25% funding structure. So as an example, for round one, public art funded three different projects. One was a mural on a private property where they were able to sign the contract and go with the payment structure as outlined contractually. Two was actually providing artist supplies for an artist who was commissioned for a large mural with a private company, and that particular artist was contracted with that entity to do the commission. So we just contracted with that artist for the supplies, and that was under $10,000. And so in that case, that artist was able to follow the 75-25 structure, because in that case, with sort of a smaller dollar amount award, it doesn't really make sense to have it go the 40-50-10 route as we had seen in larger grant awards. Potential project locations: City of Chattanooga Public Service Buildings, City of Chattanooga Parks and Greenways, City of Chattanooga major transportation corridors, and private properties with public space located in Chattanooga. And just a note in terms of private properties with public space located in Chattanooga. If you say have a company that has their own property and they want to do, I don't know, like a permanent piece in their conference room that's not widely accessible by the public, that they don't actually host events or have public programming in that conference room, that's probably not going to be really the definition of public space when you think about private property. Say, for instance, though, the business had a lobby that they programmed with visual arts exhibitions, so on and so forth. That, and you didn't necessarily need admission fees, so on and so forth, to access it. That would be that's a private business, private property with publicly accessible space, and that would work. So you want to think about, when you are possibly looking to partner with a private business, about just how accessible is that particular space in order for the public at large to view whatever the particular artwork is, whether it be film, dance, visual arts. Applicants, if you do want to apply with a project location on private property, we do really recommend that you include a letter of support from the property owner. And that's a big definition in terms of who actually, especially in the case of downtown infrastructure, when you have a lot of leases and businesses being renters, In this case, you would actually need to get the property owner on that. So just keep in mind in terms of the actual property owner, especially if it's something more lasting with a public art project, may not actually want a mural on the side of their building. So you do need to actually have a letter of support from the property owner. Other notes, all artists engaged in projects must be approved by ArtsBuild and/or the Chattanooga Public Art Commission. I want to talk about this just a little bit because this will relate to project timelines, how quickly contracts are executed, and just generally some considerations and how you propose your project budget and your project timeline. The Chattanooga Public Art Commission is the governing body for public art, including public art temporary exhibitions. So whether it's permanently sited or a temporary exhibition that is 2 years or less, if it is going to be on public property within the city of Chattanooga, the commission weighs in, and they are the ones that have approval on that project and the artist that is assigned to that project, or with that project rather. So it could be that while the grant committee, let's say you are a person that proposes a mural on a bridge abutment, and you think that the abutment actually is part of a park, but because it's part of a bridge, we actually need approval from the Department of Transportation. So not only is it really looking at the artist work grant may love your proposal and want to fund it, but what a lot of times what I have to do as an administrator is say, is this an actual appropriate location from all relevant city departments that may have to have a hand in caring for the artwork? So in that case, with the bridge abutment, then I would probably have parks weigh in on that. I would have CDOT weigh off, and like if you could put a mural on the abutment of a bridge if it was structurally sound. And then once I get all those approvals from relevant city departments, then that proposal has been fully vetted by and can be presented to the commission and say, yes, the city has reviewed it, we're good to go. What do you think, commission, in terms of what the project is, the artist is, so on and so forth. So I will say that a public art project on public property is a little more time intensive to get to that first payment to make sure that that project can actually materialize. You will need to kind of think about that when you propose your proposal with your project timeline, if that's sort of your intent. I would probably say, for instance, if this round concludes the end of February and you have the review process for applications occurring in March, it could be very possible, if you're proposing a public art project on public property, that you wouldn't actually be able to go under contract until May or June, just because you need to allow maybe an extra month or two to make sure that kind of regulatory arm can weigh in on your proposal. So I did want to mention that the commission does meet every other month. I can call an emergency meeting to review commission proposals, but if there's not necessarily a quorum of commissioners, then we can't actually vote on your proposal. So it's kind of a moot point. So I like to stick to regularly scheduled meetings as much as possible, but I did want to kind of tell you how the commission weighs in to your overall proposal. That does not mean that, if it's a public art proposal on private property, you do have less of a consideration in terms of governing entities that have to sort of weigh in and give their okay on your project, but you will have other considerations with that private property in terms of insurance, care, installation. So it won't actually remove a lot of those considerations. It just may go a little bit quicker. So I did want to be very, very transparent about sort of the timeline to actually start your project when you do, as you apply, as you consider what project you're going to apply for. If applicable, participant and audience members must be tracked. We definitely want the project expected outcomes to be stated and assessed. Project and finished artworks must be documented. Again, typically that's photo documentation. And then all within your particular publicity for your project, you must recognize the Artist Work Grant Program and partners, which include Artsbuild, Public Art Chattanooga, Southeast Tennessee Development District. And then again, status reports must be submitted every 6 months where applicable. And we say where applicable, knowing that some of these projects won't take a year, but if you do have a midpoint where a status report is required, all projects, no matter whether it's Artsbuild or Public Art, will require a status report. Unless you are a 75-25 funded opportunity, you would need to say kind of what the mid part in your timeline is to look at that funding source of, well, not funding source, but funding structure, I should say. So I think that the most important thing to say in terms of the grant application evaluation criteria, that's all on this form right here, this particular screen. What I wanted to say regarding planning, budgets, and timeline, we've gone over the funding structure for each grant and how the grant will be paid in installments. When you consider your budget and overall project timeline, please consider in your proposal how your project timeline will advance with these funding increments in mind. Without your entire grant funding up front, it's a very important consideration. So if you are doing a project that's over a year and you know that you're going to get 40% up front, you got to make that 40% if your midway part of your project is 6 months in. Propel your project going forward on that 40% until you get your 50% midway through. So really encourage you to think about in your application process, not only your overall budget, but how you're going to continue to escalate your project based on those particular funding increments. Lastly, while I did talk about the commission definitely reviewing public art proposals and the grant that's assigned to it, they also will be the mechanism to approve the placement and final design of that project. So if you are a public art proposal where you have had your proposal completely vetted through applicable city departments and then the commission at large, you go forward, you perhaps do and again, it's not required, but let's say you do a community visioning process, or you develop the artwork design in some form or fashion. Once you finally have that final design in place, that has to be approved before implementation can proceed. So again, you'll want to kind of notate when the commission will meet as it relates to your overall timeline for implementation and overall project timeline. I want to turn it over to Miss Miriam to just do some remaining slides, and then I'm sure we went through that pretty quick, so I'm sure there's probably plenty of questions which we will use the time for remaining. Miss Miriam.
Thanks. Yeah, I see lots of questions coming up. I'm just going to quickly talk about the application process. So Artsbuild is facilitating the application process. So a lot of your questions about that are always filtered through me. And like I said, at the end, I'll put in my email address so you can directly contact me. But one thing I'd like to or these are a couple of points I'd like to highlight, not just for this grant program, but for all grant programs in general. Making sure that you review the grant guidelines. I know it seems like a really basic thing, but a lot of people miss key things in their application because they didn't necessarily look at the criteria as far as, like, you know, what is eligible as far as expense items, or even just being eligible to apply for a grant. So please look at the grant guidelines. That's why it's one of the first questions on our grant applications is, have you reviewed the guidelines. So that's the best place to start, is taking a look at the guidelines. Then go through the application, just, skim through it, look at the questions. And I recommend actually writing out your application in a separate document. And once you're ready, just copying and pasting over, because I've had several folks who have started applications, and because, something happened with their computer, or they didn't click save, they've lost their information. So just, as a cautionary thing, just open a Word document, even a notebook, pen and paper, just write your answers down and then go back in and copy and paste them. Be clear and concise in your application. We received an overwhelming amount of applications in the last round. We expect the same for this round. Your project description is the key to having an effective application. It should not only be clear and concise, but it should also be able to provide as much detail as possible to understand your vision for your project. And should leave us with few questions, if any at all. I mean, that's, the one place where you really want to drive home, like, why you want to do this project. And also making sure you're answering every part of each question. Sometimes, there's multiple parts to a question. So, you might just answer the first part. When you don't answer all of the question, that leaves questions for the panelists. And so that kind of puts more, a lot of doubt in the effectiveness of you actually executing your project. So making sure that you're answering all of those questions as best as you can. And then Kat also talked about this, but providing a thorough budget outline of how your funds that you're requesting will be used. So we have gone in and revamped the application from the last round. If you'll notice, there's I guess it's a downloadable PDF, a budget that you can go in and actually type in your expense line items. So please be sure to use that and list in detail how your funding is going to be used. That's another crucial part of your application that some people we noticed in the last round did not do as great job with.
Miriam, do you mind if I interject momentarily?
Yeah, go ahead.
I did want to say, because we did see this a lot through the first round, and I want to just say up front and discourage that is what we noticed is some applications were using grant funding to say fund applications to participate in their exhibition or to award. Basically, the grant was serving as a pass-through to individuals. And I will say that is something that collectively the committee did kind of frowned on simply because it was sort of putting onus on the applicant to adhere to the parameters of the grant, but then the money is just simply being served as a pass-through to whomever they are awarding it to, and therefore you can't really get the same sort of evaluative metrics going forward, so on and so forth. So I definitely want to discourage as much as possible presenting in your application pass-through allocations. What I would propose is that you possibly look at another funding source that doesn't have those particular stipulations, but I know that was something that the committee felt very strongly on during the first round. Go ahead, Ms. Miriam.
This is my last point. So you do have the option of submitting your application as a draft. One thing I would ask is that you submit it, if you are planning on submitting it as a draft, that you do it well in advance of the deadline, and also just any questions. So the last round, literally the day before and the day of, I had tons of people calling and asking me questions and asking me to look at their applications. I don't have the bandwidth to do that. So I'm happy to help you, walk you through the whole process, talk about your application, give you feedback, but it has to be in a timely manner. So don't wait till the last minute to ask me for questions or ask me to review your application. That is it as far as just tips and things to keep in mind. I know for a lot of applicants, this is your first time applying for grants. It can be a scary process. I'm here to help you, walk you through that. We're here to provide you with as much support as possible, and we're encouraging as many individual artists to apply for this, and also just becoming familiar with the process of applying for grants. As you know, ArtsBuild excuse me, ArtsBuild does offer other grant opportunities. And so, if this is your first attempt, please feel free to come back again and apply for our other grant programs. So now I want to look into opening it up for questions. I know we've already gotten a lot in the chat box. One question that Ben asked is, so you're asking on behalf of the Creative Discovery Museum, you're wanting to get an artist to help with renovations.
So Miriam, I apologize. I do know that he did say later on the chat that was his question was answered. So I think
he's okay. Okay, great.
So if you don't mind, Miriam, I can actually I've been monitoring some of these questions, and Alex asked, can Public Art Chattanooga help us find a location for a permanent installation? Possibly. And I say possibly because it does require me working with other departments internally to approve it. So while we do on the grant portal have what's known as an artwork site form, which will show you properties and public property that have submitted interest in having art located on the public property, it has not been a thoroughly vetted opportunity, meaning that I have not vetted whether or not, say, artists, Alex's, say, for instance, mural is going to be okay on ABC infrastructure that offered the form that they are interested in participation. Does that make sense? So while we do have locations on the grant portal of public places that have indicated their interest in being an artwork site form or artwork site location rather, I would say that it's going to require a little more work internally to finalize that. I will say that if you were to tell me within the next few days what you were thinking about proposal wise and what location, there is a possibility that I can kind of escalate vetting it through before the application deadline. But I can't say in true reality, with the fact that we're getting into municipal elections, we're getting into the last few days of this term, that everyone will be as responsive to me as my questions will be to them. So that all being said, is you can propose it and not know necessarily if it's approved, or we can work on the front end. We will do whatever we can to help strengthen your proposal. Just know that we may not get an answer before this deadline of whether or not that's a truly vetted location, because it does require input from other departments typically. So I hope that helps, Alex. Will there still be another application deadline in May? So we intend to do another round in May. However, that is dependent on funding for this particular round. If we get a tremendous amount of amazing proposals, they're all great projects, they all can be funded, perfect stars align, we may not have a round 3. So we intend to have a round 3 as long as funds are available, but that's also in particular just based on how it works for this particular round. So that remains to be seen.
I would say on ArtsBuild, as far as exhibition performance, we are going to have a third round for sure.
With public art in particular, I have probably about 88,000 perhaps going forward. And just realistically, built infrastructure is pretty expensive. So it just sort of depends, which is one of the reasons, and I will address some of the questions I'm seeing here about examples or individuals that won awards in the first round, which is one of the reasons we kind of had to lower the dollar amount. And we did not actually, from a public art perspective, I did not fund anybody's proposal at 100%. Most of the awards were under 27.5. So it just made sense to say that the grant awards were going to be up to 30,000 for this next implementation. So I would hope, that perhaps the projects are maybe more tactical urbanism in nature, or something that doesn't require such a huge budget to where we can have a round 3. But I can't say that necessarily for public art, just because I only have so much money I can give. And so it's a lot more expensive to do built infrastructure. I will say, I did want to make a note that I don't think I updated my screen from the last presentation, is that film in itself is no longer a public art category. If it is it was in the original round 1. If it is an installation that is looping in the public environment, then it would actually be a public art project. But most of the film proposals we saw were very different in nature, where that was not necessarily the intent. And so you could see that being more of a temporary exhibition, where perhaps your films are being exhibited, viewed through a certain time period. But in terms of a permanent public artwork, the committee felt very strongly that film was not an applicable built permanent infrastructure for at least the parameters of this program. Not saying in general, but certainly for the parameters of this program. What I will say, let me go back and look up here. We'll go over the timeline, John, for reviewing and awarding grants in just a moment.
I have a question about releasing the awardees from the last round. So because of the lengthy process that Kat just went through explaining, we actually didn't finalize them and sign all the contracts until this week. And so we won't have a press release, or we will have a press release about the awardees from the last round next week. That's another thing to note. So, Kat is really here to answer these really nitty-gritty things about public art, and as far as how quickly the turnaround is, because I know a lot of people have asked, with public art grants, it does take much longer. With exhibition and performance, it's much quicker. We don't have all of these, technical and, consulting with the city and all those things. So yeah, we don't have all those things. So that's just something to keep in mind when you are proposing a project, is the category that you're applying in. And if you're trying to get a project up and running pretty quickly, it's important to consider that you are going to have to go through a longer process when it comes to actually getting your contracts and funds allocated to you with public art versus with exhibition and performance.
And just to piggyback on what Miriam was saying, a lot of this relates to how in-depth and thorough those proposals are. Again, when the committee is left still wondering a lot of questions, then we have to go back. Really, your proposal, you are best served by really just putting everything, like attaching nitty-gritty Excel spreadsheets, so on and so forth. I will say that in terms of performance, exhibition grants, or even public art projects, it's not so much necessarily the number and I'll let Miriam answer that, but it's not necessarily so much the number as you have to think the actual dollar amount associated with each project, because each round, and I'll let Miriam say what the dollar amount is for performance and exhibitions, each round for performance and exhibitions has a designated grant amount threshold. So while she can certainly say the number may be irrespective of how many we awarded next round, because it kind of just depends on the dollar amount associated with each project.
Yeah, so to answer your question, we awarded 4 exhibition and performance grants.
And I see Mark said, it seems the pass-through aspect is a positive aspect because we are providing work for those artists, which is the goal. Yeah, it could, again, serving as an advisory capacity and not necessarily representing to say how the committee feels. I'm going to extrapolate it the best I can, in the sense that the way that we saw in applications, the way that they were hoping to use money wasn't always necessarily providing work. It may have compensated an artist just for participating in an exhibition, like applying for something. And that doesn't, I mean, it's great because it provides economic benefit to the artist, but that artist may or may not necessarily be selected to participate in an exhibition. So that's kind of the pass through that I'm referring to. Again, every case is different in terms of proposals. I will say that that was the general takeaway that both Miriam and I heard from round one. If you, and which is why I am in transparent mode, just saying I would discourage against that as much as possible and allow for either, if you as the individual organization, if that's part of your in-kind contribution, you know, or monetary contribution to your project, that would be a perfect example of that. But in terms of what is constituted pass-through, you are completely within your right to structure your budget and propose it as you see fit. What is the highest goal of the grant that we should aim for? I mean, if the maximum amount award is 25 and 30 in each project, your max that is possible is 25 or 30. So it's go for it. Be a ninja and figure out how to make that work based on your proposal. I mean, Mark, I don't mean number, I mean purpose. What is the highest goal of the grant that we should aim for? I mean, you essentially need to look at and again, I don't know necessarily what, Mark, can you tell me what you are interested in applying for, what particular category, and that'll help me tell you what the answer is. Because essentially, if you look at the sort of the guidelines, and I'll go back, look at the evaluation criteria, which is on the Arts Build grant portal, and it'll show you sort of the points aligned with, let me see if I can go back to that real quick.
Well, while you're answering that, someone asked who is on the committee. So the committee is made up of a selection of people from the public art, from Set D, and additional community members who are involved within like the arts community at large, not just in Chattanooga, but within the Thrive region itself.
Essentially, Flo, it is Set D, Arts Build, public art commissioners, so that you do have 2 commissioners to kind of like see what's going on in the horizon that'll possibly be presented to the commission later. But we also have representation from arts and cultural organizations from Athens, Dalton, and I can't remember the last one off the tip of my brain, but essentially it is a cross section of those within the Thrive 2055 region who are on the panel. And I don't know, can y'all see my grant application evaluation criteria screen right now?
Yes.
So that will pretty much tell you the points allotted to the quality of the proposal and sort of kind of, I guess, in terms of the points assigned to each of the criteria points. So it kind of tells you the importance per se, where you've got, you know, provides high quality arts and cultural experiences for the participants, meaningful work for an artist and addresses a need presented by COVID-19. You know, really look at that evaluation criteria. That evaluation, blah, blah, blah. I can't talk, y'all. That evaluation criteria is will be available for you to review on the grants portal so that you can reference that. So, and again, this presentation will be available ArtSpill's YouTube channel to reference as well, but you will have this reference of evaluation criteria as you continue to address your proposal. I'm backing up for questions real quick. Okay, so Thomas, the project grant categories, I mean, you essentially have a grant, category for performance and exhibitions, and then you have a grant category for public art. And essentially, those are all of those artworks, but are not limited to, that you see on the screen there. So that's what you're looking at there. And again, everyone, the grant portal at artspill.com will have all of this information within the guidelines to reference so that you know exactly what types of artworks, what the evaluation criteria, so on and so forth is going forward. Let's see, hiring artists to work on a specific projects like painters, performers, etc. Flo, can you expand on your question, please? Or you know what, I will, let's see if I can unmute you real quick.
My only point was that you could hire artists to work on specific projects as part of a larger part of the grant that you got. You would be out hiring artists or painters or dancers or whatever. That's not a pass through. That's more of working on a specific project. Correct.
Correct. I mean, like, yes, it's almost in the sense of like, and that's what I was trying to address, and forgive me, Mark, if I didn't do a great job on that one, that each proposal and what is proposed specifically kind of, and how you intend to use the fund, you can somewhat, when I was talking about exhibitions and you're paying for people to participate, but they may not actually be in the exhibition, that's kind of a pass-through, that you're encouraging participation, but they're not actually involved in the overall deliverable being the exhibition. So that would be a like straight pass-through, right? But to Flo's point, and often the case a lot of times, you know, I'll go back to public art, for instance, because that's my jam, is you have artists that can design things, but can't necessarily fabricate the work, or can't necessarily do, you know, they can't do the structural engineering drawings to get passed through planning, so on and so forth. So you as the proposal entity can have essentially subcontractors, individuals like that you plan to contract with individually as it relates to your project. Only 10% of the project budget can be used for a project manager. And I did want to specify that because a lot of these projects go over a very extensive time period and do require really specific management skills. I will say that if you look at your overall project budget, only 10% on a budget line item can be reserved for a project manager. I'm going back up. Hi, Elizabeth Talman, good to see you. If part of our project was creating a film as documentation at the end of a project, can we apply for both? You could. That's basically kind of competing against yourself. I wouldn't discourage it. I don't know necessarily if you would get awards for both. Again, a very competitive application process with, you know, I've been pretty transparent with how much money I have and then how much money Miriam has. And then I don't know necessarily if I'm going to go for a round 3 or not. So you can certainly apply for both and have fully developed proposals for both. And your film as documentation at the end of the project, you would have to think, Elizabeth, about how you intend to share that with the public in the public realm. That would be essentially part of your proposal. So you'd have to fully flesh that out. So you can propose both, but essentially you'd be applying against yourself for, and one may be funded and one may not be funded. All right, we are nearing out of time, but I see some more questions. Let's see. Hi, John. Hi. Should the budget just reflect what portion of the project is being used for? So John, so you were saying, I'm thinking if we apply for 20K, but the project budget is much longer, should we supply the budget for the 20K or the project totals? You know, I can't speak for, because you could do either one. I think it'd be very important to delineate, because I know, John, in your case, being a round one applicant, that when you initially proposed, it was the whole kit and caboodle. And now you're really only proposing one component of the film, which is great. I think I would definitely say, talk about the context of how that 20K fits into the overall project. It's up to you if you want to go into detail about the overall, to what extent you want to go into the overall project budget. But as a second time applicant, John, I think you know what you sort of put the first go around and some of the feedback you got from your application. And so just take that feedback into consideration when crafting your second proposal. And that's another thing I will say, is that we do work very, very hard. Miriam has said that she will make herself available. I will make myself available. But again, as a two-person team, please give us space to be able to help you as much as possible. And we become very limited in our capacity to help when it's literally like 24 hours before the deadline. And that's just the reality, unfortunately.
And I wanted to add, just for John's question. So in the application, at the bottom on your project budget expenses, the way you report it, there are two lines. One is like, you know, where the funds that you're applying to go to, and then one is either organizational or individual funding and in-kind donation. So that space is really like, if you want to be able to demonstrate specifically like how your grant funds fits within the grand scheme of your total project expenses, that is where you would show us that, if that makes sense and that helps.
I'm going to answer this one question. And then I also see, I know Carrie Pendergrass has joined us. She's here and she had some questions earlier. Carrie, feel free. I think I answered everything in your email correspondence, but if you have any specific questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Leah says, do you prefer us to collaborate on our project with local artists instead of artists that may be out of the Thrive area? I mean, 75% of your project budget has to fund pliers, producers, artists. It has to be within the Thrive region. So as much as possible, you want to keep the particular budget in accordance with the overall guidelines of 75% of that project budget has to be allocated for Thrive 2055 resources, individuals, fabricators. That's the local economy impact that we're talking about with these COVID-19 relief funds. So I hope that helps. You can definitely do, 25% of your budget and pay artists that are not in the Thrive 2055 region rather, but you just need to keep in mind that 75% of it does, and that the project in itself, everyone, again, as a reminder, has to be realized in Chattanooga. So while you can use fabricators and all of that great stuff from the Thrive 55 region, it needs to be based in Chattanooga. What else we got, guys?
I think that's everything.
All right, again, guys, we are here for y'all, and my email is super simple. It's the letter K and Wright, WRIGHT, at chattanooga.gov. We are here to answer your questions more specifically as you develop your proposal. But please, for the love of all that's good and holy, do not wait 24 hours until it's due, because we can't help you like we want to be able to help you. We want you to succeed as much as possible, but we can't do it when there's like a 5-minute time delay kind of thing. All right, everyone, closing it out. Thank you all. Have a wonderful weekend.
Bye. Be safe.
Bye-bye.